In this video, I'll show you how I make desert bases. Hi everyone, and welcome to another brushstroke basing guide, where this time I'm going to take you through the steps I took for making these desert bases. So desert bases are great because they can work in any gaming system, from historical through to fantasy and even sci-fi. Deserts will pretty much fit anywhere. And the good thing about these bases is they're really simple to make as well. But before we start, I would just like to say my usual thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel so far. This little channel is starting to grow, and that's really great. If you're new to the channel or you've not subscribed yet, then please do hit that subscribe button, because it's that support that does actually make these videos possible. And without that subscription, then it does make these things very difficult. So if you'd like to see more of these videos, then please hit that subscribe button. Okay then, so let's make some desert bases, and the first thing obviously you're going to need is a base, and this is a 40mm MDF base which I've just stuck to a cork for ease of handling. If you are going to use a plastic base, then I would definitely recommend that you wash it in some warm soapy water, because we will be using a crackle paint and they don't react well to any release agents. In fact, they just tend to flake off. And the specific crackle paint I'm using is Agrilan Earth from Games Workshop. This stuff's dead easy to use. I'm just going to use my sculpting tool, a little bit of water just to make sure that the paint doesn't stick to the tool, and then you just spread it out onto the base. I'm going to spread it across about half of the base. That way I can choose where I put the sand to cover up any bits that I don't like, and you just spread it out as if it's just like a chocolate spread across your base, quite thin because we don't want them to be particularly chunky, and then you just leave that to dry and hopefully you'll come back with lots of nice crackles. Okay then, so the crackle paint's now fully dry and it's formed these really nice little cracks, which is a relief. I always get a bit nervous when I do things which aren't in my control. And yeah, this is looking pretty good. So now we're going to make the sand dune that's going to come off it. And I think there's nothing really I want to cover up, so we'll just go for a half of this base, and the material I'm going to use to make the dune is some wall filler, or I think in America it's called spackle. Maybe put a comment below if I'm wrong. And you're going to need plenty of water, because the secret to making these is to keep the material really nice and wet. Yeah, so you want a fair amount because you're going to make it quite heaped, and then you want to add a drop of water to make sure that it moves nice and smoothly. And then using your sculpting tool again, I tend to use this end because it gives a lot more control. Dip that in the water as well so that it doesn't stick to that. And we want to start off with just pressing it down against the base to make sure that it's making a good contact. And you're looking just to shape it into the general area where you want your dune to start. Yeah, so just moving it around and pressing it into the base to make sure it's got a good contact. Okay, so that's starting to look like the sort of position I want the dune to be in. Now I'm going to start to push the material away from the cracked earth so it starts to build into a higher dune towards the edge of the rim. I'm just starting to move the material around, really, just to try and make a nice wedge shape. It doesn't need to be particularly neat or regular. In fact, actually, you want it to have quite a quirky, natural look. And just keep moving that around. Make sure it still stays quite wet so that it sort of forms its own shape. I'm going to grab a little bit more filler and just add it in here just to build the dune up a little bit higher. That's one of the good things about working with filler for this, is as long as you keep the material wet, you can continue to add more and take some away and keep sculpting it, and it'll be workable until you're ready to leave it. Yeah, that's looking better. It's going to probably get rid of that bit. Don't think I really need that bit. Right, yes, just keep moving the material around, building it up so that it makes that nice wedge shape towards the edge. If you find that the filler is starting to stick to the tool like this, then just give it a quick wipe off, rinse it again in the water so that it just glides over the material. Really, you're just wanting it to be like icing a cake. You want it to be nice and smooth, and the secret to that is just keeping the material really wet. Just add a little bit more water on the sculpting tool now, just to really start to get things nice and smooth. And any overhang you can just clean up with your finger and keep that sharp edge, and then just start to smooth it down. Okay, so now I've got the shape that I want. I'm going to start adding some extra details like ridges in the sand. For this, I'm just going to start off by doing gentle stripes from left to right, just to put in some ripples and ridges. And to really soften the transition between the cracked earth and the dune, I'm going to add some more water now and just really feather in the filler. It's almost to a point where it's just a liquid, and when that dries, it'll have a really smooth transition. And it's back to adding those ripples left to right, really soft with the tool, lots of water so it just glides. You can actually turn and use the edge of your tool and start to just push those ripples. But again, you want to just try and keep it really soft so that the material is just settling on its own and makes its own soft ripple. You don't want to be carving it in any way. Then just neaten up the edge and we're pretty much done. Right, so I left this overnight to dry and it's now rock solid. If you do find that you have some resculpting that you want to do, then you can actually reactivate it by adding a bit of water. And with your sculpting tool, and just smooth things down. Or if you find any rough edges, then you can just take a file and sand those down. Okay, for the next step, it's time just to add a few extra little details. This can be anything from rocks and skulls and things. For this, I'm just going to take a bit of coarse sand mix from Javis Scenics and some PVA glue. And then it's just a case of putting a small dab where you want the rocks to be and then drop those on. So I like to use a cocktail stick just to apply the glue with. I find it gives that little extra bit of control. Position wise, I think I'm going to put the rocks on a patch where there isn't much cracking, just to give the impression that the sun's been beating down on the other areas and that's why it's more cracked. Right, okay, I think that's looking pretty good. So now it's just a case of priming the base, and for this I'm going to use 2 primers through an airbrush. I'm going to use Vallejo's surface primer in black, and then I'm going to do a small zenithal highlight with some surface primer in grey, just so that it's easier to pick out the details on camera for you guys. Okay, so the base is now primed and ready for painting and should look something like this. Obviously I'm going to be painting this now for desert, but you could use this method equally for making space bases and maybe do Mars and paint it red, or you could do ice and snow and add some blue washes on there and that would look just as good. And the first colour is going to be a base coat all over with khaki from Vallejo. Now I'm using an airbrush, but you could equally do this just with a hand brush. Make sure it goes on nice and smooth with some water and get into all those creases and cracks. And now I'm just doing a very loose zenithal highlight with some bone white from Vallejo. If you're doing this with a brush, then you could equally just achieve exactly the same with a dry brush. For the next step, I'm going to bring out those ripple details in the sand dune, and for this I'm going to apply a wash of Seraphim Sepia from Games Workshop. As with all washes, give it a good shake before you use it, and then load up a fair amount on your brush. When it comes to applying the wash, what you want to do is you want to be a little bit more controlled, and you want to apply it following the ridges that you've made in the sand. The aim here is not to flood these ridges, in fact you just want it to be quite subtle, so just allow a small amount of the shade to settle into those creases. When you come onto the crackled area of the base, you can afford to be a bit more generous and let that shade really sink into those cracks. Once that wash has been applied, you're going to want to let that dry fully before moving on to the next stage, which is going to be applying an all-over dry brush of Bone White from Vallejo. So for dry brushing, just take a small amount of paint and on some tissue paper, work that paint into bristles by rubbing the brush back and forth, and take off all that excess so that you're left with just a small amount of paint in those bristles. Then just do a quick test on the back of your hand, and then it's just a case of flicking your brush back and forth across the surface of the base so it catches just those raised areas. Okay then, so moving on to the next step, which is going to be another dry brush, but this time I'm going to be dry brushing with a weathering powder. This particular one is Bone Dust from Forge World, but you can use pretty much any pale yellow. If you've not used weathering powders before, they're a very fine powder that you can apply in lots of different ways to your model to give different weathering effects. In this particular case, we're going to be using it just as we did before as a dry brush. So I'm going to apply a small amount to my tissue and work it into my dry brush. And then using exactly the same dry brushing action as before, I'm going to flick across the base just so that it catches those raised areas. So what you're looking for this application to do is to actually blend and smooth those colour transitions together, and it'll give a more soft and muted finish. Once you've built your weathering powder up and you've got some nice blends and transitions, you're going to need to seal that in because otherwise the powder will just rub straight off. And the way you do that is by applying a spray varnish, and I like to use Dull Coat from Testers. Okay, so with that weathering powder now sealed, I'm just going to darken down the colour of the cracked earth so that there's a nice distinction between that and the sand. And for this I'm going to use some thinned down Agrax Earthshade with some Lamium Medium. It's about 4 parts medium to 1 part Agrax Earthshade. Because the shade is really thin, you can be quite generous and just let that shade pool and create different patches of darker and lighter areas. You can even add a little bit into the sand dunes as well, just to add some extra shadow and interest there. Once that shade is fully dry, you just need to add a couple of grass tufts and paint in the rim colour, whichever colour you like, and the base is complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it useful. If you have, then please do give it a like and maybe drop a comment below. If you'd like to see more of these videos, then please do hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be told whenever I post another video. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.